Hello and welcome to the Frans van Cout interview. I'm Annette Young. We live in a world where the squandering of women's talent is a global disgrace. Now, these are the sort of words you may normally associate coming out of the mouth of a women's activist, but in fact, they are the words of the head of the Australian Army. Lieutenant General David Morrison became a sensation when he spoke in London at last month's conference to end sexual violence in conflict, and he joins me in the studio today. General Morrison, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Annette.
Now, you made a very, very powerful speech about rape being used as a weapon of war. Let me just quote some words back to you. You said, "Armies that revel in the value of the male over the female, who celebrate the violence that is integral to my profession rather than seeking ways to contain it. They do nothing to distinguish the soldier from the brute." These are not the sort of the words that you normally would hear from, the lips of an army general.
Well, I think, I would hope that all, certainly most army generals leading armies made up of men and women who are reflections of their societies would at least be thinking along similar lines. I think armies are about protecting people, and in order to protect them, they have to have empathy for the desiccated societies that they're operating amongst. And we see that in Afghanistan. In my own country's case, we've seen it in places like Timor or the Solomon Islands. If you can understand and empathise with the population that you are protecting and working among, then you are much better as an army, more capable. And of course, 50% of every population that armies work amongst are women.
So would you call yourself a feminist?
Yes, proudly.
And what brought you to that point?
Well, look...
I mean, let's be frank,
yeah.
because there are not too many army generals who are wandering around the world claiming to be feminists.
Well, I don't wander around the world, but I've been given the opportunity by France 24 to talk to you and your listeners today, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. I came into my job as the head of the Australian Army just over 3 years ago. And at that time, the Australian Defence Force was being reviewed again. We had had 13 major reviews in 15 years into behavioural issues. And it became apparent to me as I talked to a group of very senior, distinguished women in Australian society that the problem, as complex as it may have been, over those 13 reviews, often stemmed from a lack of inclusivity in our own military workforce. And as I looked into it, talking with people like Elizabeth Broderick, who is our Sex Discrimination Commissioner in Australia, it became very clear to me that while you can't find a panacea to these issues, if we had a greater participation of women in our ranks, and when I took the job it was less than 10% of our workforce. And
what is it now?
It's just on 12%. So in 3 years, or in 2.5 years, we've increased the number of women in the Australian Army by over 600, recruited and retained them. And we have opened up all of our areas of the Army, indeed of our Defence Force, to women. So if women want to become members of our armoured corps or our infantry now... As
combat soldiers?
Yes, absolutely. They have to meet common, non-gender specific physical employment standards, but once they've done that, there is no bar to them. And as I said in London, and I've said in my own country, we need to make talent the discriminator, not gender.
Look, I'm just very curious to know, though, did you come from a family of strong women?
Yes, my mother, my sister, women friends who I had at university before I joined the Army, my wife, who is the strongest woman I have ever met in my life, and the most lovely. I thought I might get that in while I was talking to you. That they all provide an influence. But I tell you, from a professional point of view, it's seeing the work of women soldiers and officers, and not just Australian. Women from all around the world in places like Afghanistan or in Timor or in Iraq or elsewhere, who have gone to the fore in trying to bring military solutions to very complex societal problems. And if you have women involved, you are more capable. I would like to say that, I'm driven by a degree of altruism. Of course I am, and I believe in everyone getting a fair go. But my mind now is fully made up that workforces, whether they are military or non-military, that are gender diverse, in fact ethnically diverse, are more capable organisations because of that.
Now, you talked earlier there about the fact that it's now at 12%. What is the percentage that you're wanting to reach?
I would think that quite realistically we should be able to attain a workforce within the Australian Army that is 20% women by the end of this decade.
How tough is it to do something like that?
Well, I mean, military service isn't for everybody, men or women, and
but it's not just people who want to do it, it's also the mindset of the culture that they're coming into.
Indeed. So, we, like the French Army, draw from the families of Australia or France to make up our ranks. Now, if the talented women of Australia look at the Army and see it as a place where we aren't inclusive, where we are exclusive because of gender, embracing some sort of distorted mythology, the best soldiers are male, Anglo-Saxon, white, and we squander all of this potential that could make a real difference from a military perspective wherever we're asked to serve. I mean, some of your imagery that's showing now on the screen is proud French women, part of the French military, who are doing a wonderful job wherever France is asking them to serve. We need to be embracing that.
But it's not so much of the difficulty of, say, going to fight in a war zone. Some of these women who do have positions within armed forces are finding there's just as difficult a place as to be actually in the barracks. And in fact, your army is not one without its problems. I mean, last year it was revealed that a number of highly inappropriate and demeaning emails have been sent to female staff members, and you took to YouTube to address the troops. Let's just take a listen to what you had to say.
Sure. I have stated categorically many times that the Army has to be an inclusive organisation in which every soldier, man and woman, is able to reach their full potential and is encouraged to do so. Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues have no place in this Army.
What was the reaction to that YouTube message by your fellow senior officers?
Oh, 100% supportive. I mean, this isn't some sort of one-man crusade here. This is me being given the opportunity as a senior leader of a 113-year-old institution to try and change some cultural issues that we have to address during my tenure as the chief. But the leadership, men and women of the Australian Army, and in fact, not just the leadership, the overwhelming majority of the men and women that make up the Australian Army were 100% behind me. I should point out that clip was only ever put together to speak to my workforce. The fact that it ran on YouTube and gained a great deal of attention both in my own country and elsewhere is, I found, somewhat surreal, because all it is a man telling his workforce that treating their colleagues with respect is a precondition of their employment. There's nothing revolutionary in that. But you look across the world, you look at every society, secular, non-secular, developing countries and those countries that call themselves first world countries, women do not get a fair go. They are not given education opportunities, employment opportunities. They are the victims of domestic and societal violence well beyond that is experienced by men. And of course all armies draw from their societies. We have to tackle this. I can only tackle it within my own army, but these issues that I'm talking about now, and I'm only one voice amongst many, of course, these apply to every society on the planet.
Now, you argued in London that all militaries around the world should open up all areas of service to women as a way of changing their culture and helping end sexual violence in war zones. But is that possible, particularly in countries with very conservative viewpoints when it comes to women?
Look, I also said that I fully respect that not all countries would be able to take this path for cultural reasons or religious reasons, and I don't set myself up as some sort of director in regards to how they will approach these issues. But I've got to say, in my own country's case, the more we can include not just women but men and women from ethnic groups that haven't traditionally joined our workforce, the more we embrace their potential and their talent, the better off we've got to be. I mean, I'm like every chief of army the world over. I'm in competition with all of the leaders of industry, the leaders in the public service. We need to be recruiting the best to defend Australia, in my case. It makes great sense to me.
And finally, do you think the day that the Australian Army is headed by a woman is far off?
I think that we will have a woman chief of army probably within the next 10 to 15 years, and we absolutely should have.
Well, on that very, very optimistic note, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. That's Lieutenant General Morrison from the Australian Army. That's it for this edition of the Franz Van Kat interview. Do stay with us because there'll be more news and headlines coming up very shortly.